Okay, so here are my 5 audience members. Thanks for coming. All right, I'm gonna get started. Perfect. Okay, so for my country that I've selected this time around is actually Brazil. The reason why I chose Brazil is just because, actually, for me, since I'm Mexican, it's also in the Latin American kind of group, so I chose that. Capital of Brazil is actually Brasilia, so it's just Brazil with the IA. It's very easy to remember. They're actually smaller than, it's compared to the US, but it's just slightly smaller. For me personally, after researching and kind of coming up with the numbers, I feel like it's overpopulated, especially when it comes to the lower class, middle class, which we'll get into in a little bit. The geographic location, part of it's actually eastern South America, sorry. And it borders the Atlantic Ocean. It's actually considered a developing country, and by that I mean just because in the early 1800s, going into the 1900s, they had a bit of a issue with the currency rate exchange, which is very, very huge, that I was researching. And basically the amount for a Brazilian real dollar, I guess, compared to a US dollar was actually divided by half. So even the equivalency of one Brazilian real dollar is actually equivalent to a US dollar of 0.317. So it's very, very small. You can only imagine the higher class, middle class, and lower class. The higher class would go into a middle class level, middle class to a lower class, and of course the lower class would already go into poverty, if not already in that specific category or categorized that way. Some of the current events that are going on right now in Brazil is actually illegal wildlife trade, which is kind of interesting to me just because you can already know right now that Brazil is actually also illegal drug trade, so specifically cocaine. So of course with wildlife, I was like kind of amazed that it's a little bit, it's two different aspects of trade, but also still illegal. Also, too, the air and water pollution is very contaminated just because of mining activities. Since they're located right off the border of the Atlantic Ocean, it kind of coincides with the pollution. So the water intake that they have, as well as the air that they breathe, is also increasing the amount of people that are having to visit the doctors on a daily basis, not a weekly basis. You can just imagine, depending on each class and where they live, these people are having to wait hours on end just to actually get into the office or see a doctor, and by that time it may already be too late. Some of the ethnic groups there in Brazil is actually white and black, mostly. And there's actually a different name that they go off for this. The biracial mixed with white and black is actually mulatto. So I thought that was kind of neat that they have their own way of specifying a certain biracial group. Some of the specific dishes that they have, their traditional one is feijoada, which is mainly a pork and a beef mixture along with the side of white rice, which to me sounds pretty good, especially looking at a picture. But they also have a smaller, like pomegranate, if not grapefruit, kind of slices that kind of equal out the tasting, so you get kind of like a sweet side of it too, which I thought was pretty neat. Some of the transportation there, just because they have a lot of challenges, especially in the lower and the middle class, they specifically depend on more of the bus route versus those in the higher class. They actually depend more on their car because they have the money to do that, to actually own a car and then be able to drive it throughout their city. So you can imagine the struggle that they have with the bus transportation, as well as some of the flight transportation that they have there, because their money was invested more so for the higher middle class, which also, going back into the currency rate exchange, a lot of people from Brazil were actually confused at the way that the government was running their money. They were putting money more into the higher and middle class versus contributing to the lower class and trying to push the lower class into getting that education that people were needing to go to get their children to school, or they have to get to work somehow. So it's either by foot or on bike, or even trying to go for the bus routes. Some of the languages primarily spoken in Brazil is actually Portuguese. That being said, there's also a little bit of like a Spaniard kind of Spanish, as well as a little bit of Arab and Indian kind of language as well, but it's a very small percentage, mostly Portuguese. The president right now for Brazil is actually Michel Temer, which he was newly introduced a couple years ago. Some of the things that they're known for in Brazil is actually the samba dance, which is very traditional, as well as their soccer team. And honestly, whenever the Brazilian soccer team, since they're World Cup qualified, they're actually represented by the samba kind of music when they're introduced onto the field. So I thought that was kind of cool. The main religion in Brazil is actually Roman Catholic. So very structured, very devoted to their faith and religion, and that's why they're actually very family oriented and very high powered when it comes to like educational settings, especially in smaller households, especially when it comes to like the lower and middle class. Just because they're very family oriented, they're having to keep themselves very in like a smaller household. So they would rather take care of someone else in their family versus themselves first, which I can relate to because I know my family's kind of the same way. And then we do have some of the culture aspects when it comes to things that they do there in Brazil, so that way it keeps it very very occupied when it comes to the families. They play soccer a lot. They'll try to do little things in between households in their community just because they're very family oriented, even if they're not family, which I thought was really neat. So the reason why I picked Brazil is mostly because I can kind of relate to them in a way, especially being very empowered and being a Latino. And so I really liked researching Brazil. I hope you guys like my speech. Let me go ahead and show you my 5 audience member again. So yeah.